Hey, Tan, thank you for coming in. I mean, you you have such a remarkable background and so many different aspects within the community. You've done a lot of impact work. In fact, I know you from us sitting in either the board committees or on the board of ACM, Association of Computing Machinery, which is number one and is the largest computing nonprofit organization in the world, famous for their Nobel Prize of Computing called the Turing Award. And then we've done other ventures, like I think there was some kind of educational engineering group that you were, and I got invited to one of your meetings. You sit on other communities, like with the International Federation of Information Process, the Internet
IFIP.
Federation, IFIP.
Yeah.
You sit on the Global Industry Council. You've been doing that since its very beginning, and it's been like 12 years, I guess. So we've had so many different touch points, but in addition to that, you've been the senior executive for many, many years with Infosys, and we won't mind all of the different roles you've had, because you've done literally everything from HR to research and development to head of education to head of applications globally to heading up the Americas. I mean, it just the list goes on and on, right? You've done it all. So anyways, I really appreciate you coming in. We're friends as well. So because you're just a marvelous executive.
And thank you so much. I mean, it's been a pleasure, first of all, knowing you. And of course, thank you for the opportunity to interact with you on this program that you conduct so very well across the globe. Thank you so much.
So Tan, I mean, it's been so long since we talked to you. I talked to you last. I was in the old school podcast audio days, which was very scripted. This is unscripted, so we've changed a lot. So I'm going to re-ask one of the early questions that I asked 15 years ago. And I would say, what are the inflection points in your life? But you've done a lot since we last, I interviewed you. So what are those sort of major turning points that created this wonderful individual and executive that you are today?
Steven, thank you for that question, because I've been blessed for the opportunities that I've got throughout my career of over 35 years now. And a lot of that, I think, have come from some of the decisions I made. And of course, luck played a role in it as well. So maybe I can talk a few of them. The first was very early in my career, maybe 5-6 years into my career. I started as a software engineer building word processors, and then went on to create compilers for SQL and operating system level work. I enjoyed the technical work. It gave me a lot of insights into how computers work, but I got this urge to work with business customers. So at that time, I made the shift into application development when Windows 3.1 came. And that, I think, was my first inflection point, because from there it led to a lot of other things I did on with technology, whether it was the new client server applications or applications based on the internet when it came out. So it gave me a tremendous inroad into business. So that was the first one. The second one came almost a decade later, when we were in the US, but as a family, we decided we wanted to go back to India. And when most technical people were doing a B2C, which was Bangalore to California, here we were trying to do a B2B, which was back to Bangalore. And that turned out to be a great time, because that was when the global delivery model was being established, and the center of gravity for that was really India. And of course, I joined Infosys at that time, and that changed a lot in my professional life, because all the opportunities I got to work on different areas came from being at Infosys, because I joined them when there were only 7,000 people. And of course, when I left them a couple of months ago, there were more than 300,000 people. So I got that ringside view of how scale happens, how growth happens in a company that was ethically driven. So that was the second one. And the third was, while at Infosys, out of a passion for people development, I made this decision to move from business function into a corporate function. And that was to head education, because I thought there's a lot to do with people development and that I can bring some things to the table there. And that turned out to be a real inflection point, because now in that role, I not only got to scale the Infosys education from training about 4,000 people on a single day to over 14,000 on a single day. So that itself was a great experience. But I also got to put in place programs for continuous education, which actually led to me getting an honorary doctorate from Coventry University in the UK. But beyond that, because I had this experience of corporate functions, I got an opportunity to play the role of the group head of HR for Infosys. And more recently, when Infosys had decided in 2017-18 to embark on a strategy called localization, I got picked to run the operations of that, because of my experience on both being on the business side and on the technology side. So all of this, I think, were things that happened because of perhaps being at the right place at the right time, making the right decisions maybe, but also because I had the support of my managers at the time and the teams that I was working with. So that's a combination of things that led to the experiences that I got in my professional career, Stephen.
So that's really quite a spectrum. You really started off as a very detailed, kind of like a system programmer, which means that you're programming maybe in assembler or in C.
And C, yeah. Yeah.
And that requires, I've programmed in those languages as well in my early days. In fact, even before that, I used to have to program in binary code. That's very, very difficult. You really have to understand the hardware, interrupts and registers and things like that. And then you and then you migrated into more sort of applications programming. And then from there, you got positions where you got into more of the corporate side and seen sort of the corporate sort of broader applications on the business merging with the technical. So let's get into some of those very specific roles. What was the first major sort of business role that you were asked to take on when you joined Infosys?
I was what is to be called as a delivery manager, which was about service delivery for clients. And that involved working with the teams both across geographies, both in India and in the US, and clients who were not in India. So that was a phenomenal experience, because it was not only about winning some deals that we got because of the work I was doing, but also about program managing something remotely. Today we talk about remote program management, but did that at that time because I was able to win the trust of the clients. So that was the starting point of the business roles. And from there on, I went to head service delivery for our telecom business, and then run the entire application development and maintenance service line, which is the largest service line for Infosys.
Yeah, I mean, that's again, that's fascinating, and the thing is, when you're running these corporate programs from service delivery to application development, you would understand, because you at one time used to code, right? So you'd have that sort of the very deep technical understanding as you're now managing more of the business side of and across the world.
Client interaction, yeah.
Yeah, client interaction and managing people, which can be a challenge unto itself, right? And then, as you mentioned earlier, in the inflection points, India became a hub for the world, and the world realized that it was a great center for talent and doing deep technical work. And in fact, India continues in that vein, and in fact has even grown bigger. In fact, in that capability, but now even innovation itself it's being centered out of India, and I think India is probably the biggest or the second biggest source now of new minted billionaires, I believe, something like that, right? So
unicorns, yeah.
So you've got this technical background. You then migrate into the service delivery side, the application side, and then but you got into other roles, which were not so much directly on the service application technical, but had more of the sort of the human aspect behind it. So how did you get into education? Like, how did that come about? And it's like a miracle story in a sense of Infosys and education. And there's really famous stories like the world is flat, and I recall 15 years ago you mentioned that story about how the world is flat concept came from a visit to India. So maybe you could retell that part, but retell now how you got into the education side of it.
Yeah, so on the world is flat, I think it came from when Thomas Friedman visited India and met our current non-executive chairman, Nandan Nilekani, who was walking around the campus and actually showed him the flat screen and said, the world is flat. And then that caught on, because that's on the flat screen is where we were able to connect a lot of our development centers and bring them into one room in those days. That's how I think that stuck with Thomas Friedman, and he wrote the book. On my move into education, it was really driven by passion for people development, because I had worked in both in India and in the US, and I recognized that in as much as there is so much content that people in India might have, it was the need to bring together content and communication and the ability to articulate, but also to create continuous development for us to be relevant as professionals. So there was an internal job posting, because the person who was running the position retired from the company. It was an internal job posting, and then applied for the job. And I got lucky to have been selected from a set of people who had applied, largely because I had the connect with the business, and I also demonstrated my passion, what I wanted to do, because even before that, I had done some internal programs for people development, just again out of passion. And so both of those helped me to get there. But having got there, working with the teams at that time, it gave me a platform to put together programs that led to more and more continuous education, partnerships with academia, that helped. In fact, the Commentary University thing was about creating a master's degree for people at Infosys while they were still working at Infosys in India. So they could still get a master's degree from the Commentary University. And that was about giving credit to the work that they were doing, projects that they were doing, and the learning that they had at Infosys. So, those kinds of opportunities came about because I was able to get into that role at a time when learning, and even now, learning is probably the only constant that is there for a professional.
I remember you sharing some of this maybe 10 years ago, and I was, or more than 10 years ago, and I was just surprised at just the size of the education program. So maybe you can give some numbers, like, for example, the number of square feet of your education facility, the number of colleges that you're partnering with. You already mentioned earlier in your introduction on your inflection points, how you went from X students to X number of students in one day. And I think, I mean, the numbers are just just amazing.
Yeah. No, I think it's a reflection of how Infosys has always believed in competence development as a core differentiator, and the investments the company has made in learning. And so, for example, because of the number of campus recruits that Infosys was doing at that time, we trained 15 to 20,000 people a year. And the training we put in place, because it happened over 1.4 million square feet of education space, we could train 1,400 people on a single day, 14,000 people on a single day, which was scaling up from about 4,500 that we were able to do before. Because that campus is this is in Mysore in India, and that's the world's largest residential corporate university. because these 14,000 people not only can get trained on a single day for a 26-week period, but they can also stay in the campus in very high-class facilities, which is a reflection again of the investment that the company has made on education.
Yeah, I mean, that's just remarkable, those numbers and the number of millions of square feet. And you had partnerships with what? How many colleges within India?
So in India, when we did this hiring, we had it with more than 100, 150 institutions from where people came, because the differentiation here is that these people recruited were all employees of Infosys who are getting trained. So these are now employees, but they get to sit in a classroom of that standard, get educated while they're getting paid. Yeah. And so these were from all of these institutions that they were getting hired from.
Yeah, and what it does too is you get a guarantee within Infosys of the talent that you have, that they're at a certain level, right? Because they graduate from the different colleges, but you're not really sure where they are, and then you ingest them.
You level set, right? So
Level
that clients can be confident of the work that the people do for them. Yeah, that's the idea. In fact, it's the same aspects that I brought back here into the US when we started on the localization journey, for us to be able to then recruit from campuses here and do training here so that they are ready for work with the clients. The same philosophy of hiring, making them employees, and then training them so that we can build a workforce. But what it also did was help us create net new talent. And in fact, in the localization journey, we went beyond what we were doing in India in terms of beginning to hire for skills than degrees, create an apprenticeship program. We probably ran among the largest tech apprenticeship programs here, because we recruited people who were either wanting to move into digital technologies, people who had a high school degree, but went through a program that could help them make the transition from where they were to a higher career mobility, which made a difference to them, their families, and the communities that they were coming from. But it's the same philosophy of creating that new talent through education.
Yeah, and just to explain to the audience is that we sort of did a leap of like 20 years. So you built this, and we're working with scaling this, the largest education program really in the world, with Infosys, and all of these different institutions you worked with, and then you could level set graduates that came out of those different programs because you had your own training program, but then many years later, you were then asked to take on localization and so forth, and heading out those kind of programs in the Americas, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about now. So how many schools did you sort of interact with, and how many students did you interact with? And then, as you mentioned, you were looking at reskilling. You're also not requiring a degree, as long as somebody had a good technical interest and maybe had some training in some aspect, but then you could level set here as well, right? Can you get into more detail what that looked like? Let's say I'm a high school graduate, but I always tinkered, and maybe I've taken a few college courses in Python or something like that, and maybe I had some certification, and I get on your radar screen, right? Somebody who has talent but has never gone through that formal process, that sort of traditional 4-year degree and a master's and so on. How would I get recruited? What would I do in, let's say I lived somewhere in the Midwest or whatever, to get, level set to the requirements that you need so that I can be employable within Infosys?
Great. So, of course, I should, and this, that I'm no longer with Infosys, right? So I retired from Infosys 2 months ago. But the premise of all of that is still valid, which is that first, to your question, how do you get recruited? These were by applying directly to through our websites. People got recruited for the roles. or when our teams went into campuses and communities, community colleges, or apprentice programs to recruit from. We also had partners with whom we worked to bring in the apprentices. But once they join, so in this case, somebody who had this high school degree and had some of these, what we call as learnability, right? So the desire to make a difference, to learn, basically the ability to pick generic learnings from specific instances and applying them into new programs. Right? That's really what learnability was about. And when somebody got picked, then in the apprentice model, they got trained. So they had a pre-apprenticeship that the partner provided to them, and then they became an employee. And for the next 12 months, they had a mentor who would guide them. They had a coach who would review what they were doing every so often so that the competencies that they built from work could be tracked. And they also had courses and interventions that they got so that in the 12-month period, they got enough credits that they could even choose to transfer to a 4-year degree school or 2-year school if they wanted to. Right? So the idea was you're earning, you're learning, and if you want to also convert them into credits that you can take to 4-year school or a 2-year school. And then so they got a job. So for example, we had this a driver in Amazon who joined this program and became a digital associate, which made a phenomenal difference to him and his family and how upward mobility was created.
And then how many schools did you partner with when you were in that role?
So it was no longer from schools, right? So this is people who wanted to join the apprentice model, right, depending on where they were and what they wanted to do. For example, in 2017 or 18, we made this public announcement that we wanted to hire 10,000 people overall in the US. We actually ended up hiring 25,000 people, and almost 10% of them came from at the entry level.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable, and I guess we'll leave this topic shortly. I'm just so curious, though, right? Because there's always this traditional model, and then there's this impression that you can't break through unless you follow this traditional 2 to 4 year to masters or something like that, and yet there's so many different people out there who are working in technology who don't have those kind of backgrounds and yet become very successful. In fact, some of the most successful entrepreneurs, like Bill Gates, he's known to not have finished, or Mark Zuckerberg didn't finish. They're just, and I remember Google a number of years ago did an analysis, and they found that after a certain number of years, they couldn't tell the difference, I don't think. I mean, I encourage the audience to take a look. I'm just going from memory here, but if you had somebody who had some aptitude and then you did your own training, and then you had somebody graduate from what is considered a tier 1 university, research university, like a Stanford or something. And then you maybe had somebody from a lesser known university. At the end, after a number of years, you just couldn't really tell, right? And they did some analysis, and that's why I think Google and some of these other companies started opening up. Why don't we open up the bucket so that it's not just somebody who has a degree? Have you done, while you were at Infosys, did you do some of that analysis as well, or
no, not really. We didn't do the analysis, but we certainly found that these people that we recruited who had that learnability were able to perform as well as they got the training. And it was clearly a question of, do you want to do it? Do you have the hunger? Are you willing to learn? And are you learning, and are you willing to apply that, right? So people who had that capability could clearly demonstrate the value that they could bring, and therefore add value to themselves, because then that created their upward mobility for them, right?
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So let's just spend a few more minutes about other roles that you've had within Infosys, and then even outside of that, because you did so much impact work with other organizations, right? For example, you ended up heading up HR. So let's talk just a little bit about that. And then you were heading up with education R&D. What did that mean? And we already talked about your localization efforts and what you're trying to do in the Americas at the last part of your time with Infosys. So let's catch up on these other points: the education and the R&D component, what that looked like, what HR looked like, and then anything else, and then we'll move on from Infosys and go into some of the other aspects of what you do.
Yeah. So when I joined the education unit, it used to be called education and research. So that is where they were combined. And there it was more about, first there was an aspect of knowledge management, right? So how do you bring the knowledge of a professional services firm to your clients while making sure that the IP of clients is protected, right? So that was a big piece of how all of that came together in the education research group. On the HR front, it was about putting in place some programs that brought in predictability, people helping making measurements for KPIs much more objective, so that people knew where they were going and what they need to do to get beyond. And also aspects that related to compliance. A large part of it was compliance and leadership transition, because when I was in HR is when there was a transition of CEO. So all of those became a portfolio of work that I got to do, especially working with the board on some of these critical aspects.
And I guess I should add, you became the chairman of the board for Infosys Public Services and the trustee of the board of the Infosys Foundation USA. I'm familiar with the Infosys Foundation because I've been donating or volunteering with ACM for so long, and of course, I believe the Infosys Foundation supports the ACM Computing Prize, right, which is the second highest award, other than the Turing Award. So, can you talk a little bit about that, chairman of the board of the Infosys Public Services, what that means, and then this Infosys Foundation?
So the Infosys Public Services was more recent. My involvement with them, though I've been involved in different capacities, but on the board. And Infosys Public Services works with federal and government clients, which is different from the commercial clients that Infosys overall works with. So that's why it's a separate entity. On the Infosys Foundation in the US, it was about bridging the digital gap through basically two streams. One is working with the schools and enabling teachers on computer science education through maker education so that they can bring computer education into the schools. And then, of course, through a platform called Springboard, help bridge the digital gap for anybody to access through technology, the learning that they want to help get a job in the digital world. So that's what the Infosys Foundation USA was doing, and that's the one that I was trustee of.
Yeah, and I think the Infosys Foundation, if I'm not mistaken, and so you supported the ACM and one of their prizes, but you also supported the Computer Science Teachers Association, I believe, as well, right?
Yeah, so the Infosys Foundation USA did the CTA, the Computer Teachers Association. The ACM part, I think, comes from corporate foundation and the Infosys Science Foundation. They're the ones that do the ACM part.
Yeah, just a remarkable series of contributions. On your own, though, you've been interested in things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. You did that as part of Infosys, and you're a member of the grievance board as well, related to different issues that you're handling. Let's see here. You were involved with NASSCOM. In fact, I remember I got an invite to speak from NASSCOM, and this must have been like 25 years ago. And I was thinking, who's NASSCOM? And in fact, I ended up not doing it because I just didn't know the organization. But this was, I think it was in the 1990s or something like that. But that's a really quite a famous organization in India and quite prominent, right?
Oh, yeah, they're phenomenal in what they have done for the country. Because NASSCOM, which stands for the National Association for Software and Service Companies in India, has been the catalyst for many things that the IT services industry has been able to do, and therefore a big name and a big platform. And of course, the opportunity I got at that time was to be part of the Education Council to defend competencies for IT. But this was again 10, 15 years ago, but that was something I got an opportunity to do for RASCOM. Also been part of the UN work group on creating metrics for corporates to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how they can measure their impact on SDGs, because that, I think, is another great blueprint for companies to look at, to say, how do we make sure that the money we spend can make an impact to the world in places where it needs. And the SDGs, I think, gives that blueprint for companies to look at.
Yeah, I mean, the experiences then on the impact side, like as you mentioned with the National Association of Software and Services in India, I mean, it's considered the organization out of India, and you're a member of the Education Council. You led a working group defining competencies for IT professionals. You talked about the UN itself and working with that working group in terms of defining industry metrics for corporates, right, for sustainable development goals, and you being a champion for digital skills and for your entire career. There's also the International Federation of Engineering Education Societies, and I believe there was a meeting that you were at that I was asked to attend as well. And I think it was that one, but that must have been quite a few years ago. Can you talk about the work you did with this international federation?
Yeah, so that was about, how, I mean, there it was more about, I came from the perspective that educators need to be recognized. And therefore, I was instrumental in creating what we call as the IFES Awards. And I put together a framework for recognizing educators as part of the International Federation of Engineering Education Societies, because that's a global organization with educators from across the globe. So that was my contribution to that.
Yeah, and then of course you're, I don't know if you're continuing with this, but you're on the advisory board of the University of Texas, Dallas.
Yes, I do. So I work with them on their corporate business program. There again, it is about sustainability, because the two areas of passion for me are sustainability and workforce transformation. So I get involved in one or both of these at various points in time.
Yeah, and so that's quite remarkable. And of course, I mentioned earlier at the very beginning, I've known you, through the ACM Board Professional Development Committee since 2009, when we had one of our first meetings. And ACM is a really famous organization. And then I also mentioned at the very beginning in our introduction that you're part of this IFIP organization, the Global Industry Council, since its original founding, and continue to serve in that role. The International Federation for Information Processing, which is IFIP, and then affiliated with that is the International Professional Practice Partnership. I should mention, by the way, that the GIC is on its own under IFIP. So the bylaws were changed within this organization so that we are a body or the Global Industry Council is a separate body. And just as IP3 or this International Professional Practice Partnerships is a separate body underneath IFIP directly, right? The bylaws were changed to recognize that. So, wow, that's a lot. And you got this degree, right? Honor degree in technology from Coventry University because of your work.
The competence development piece.
Yeah, it's just remarkable. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, and that's just kind of catching up. What do you want to do now? And what are your goals and the things that you hope to do in the next, let's say by 2025, and let's say maybe a broader time frame of 2030? And I guess in all of that, are you ever going to retire, or are you just going to keep being engaged in different activities?
So I think like I said, to me, two areas of passion where I think we can make a difference is in workforce transformation and sustainable development. And those are the two areas, and some of the work I'm already doing in those, and I see a great opportunity for us to be able to, really enable peace and equity through technology and education. And that's really the framework that I've created for myself to see what can we do and how do we get there, because those are my areas of familiarity are technology and education. The areas where I think we need to make a difference are in peace and equity. So that's what I want to bring together in the work that I'm engaging with and work I'm doing. I think given where we are today with so much happening in technology and changes in the pace at which it's changing, it is important to look at reskilling in a big way. And that is a great opportunity that exists both commercially and in the nonprofit sector, both sides, because the risk of not doing is going to be quite devastating, I think, if you don't act now. And therefore, I see that as an exciting opportunity today.
Yeah, and just in my reflection of your background, it's just so tremendous, so broad, very interdisciplinary, or some people will say transdisciplinary. These are different, multidisciplinary across so many different sectors. Your background encompasses everything, right? Research and development to HR to deep technical to applications, working with scientific bodies, working with engineering bodies, working with UN bodies on talent development. But really, you could do anything because your background is just so broad and deep, which is really, really unusual. And you're highly respected, so you'd be a great candidate for a board role in a public company or a private company or a startup or in a nonprofit or within science organizations, which you already are, or within the UN. I mean, I can't see any area where you would you would be just an amazing board member because of the perspective that you bring. And I know from experience, just working with you since January 2009, you execute. Like you give very considered, well thought consideration. You always contribute, and then you execute on actions, and you've never not executed, and that's so rare. There's this idea of McKinsey's framework where you get a bunch of 20 people and maybe 2 will contribute, or 2%, or what is that, 20% roughly, not quite 20%. So if you got 20, maybe 4 would be very active. Well, you got to make up for that. You're like you're one of the most active contributors I've ever met, but with humbleness and inclusion and equity and so on. So I'm saying this because I think anybody would be so fortunate to engage with you in any manner. And my experience with you has been just so positive. So with that, and we have
been very, very kind, Stephen. You're very, very kind with your words to me. You've been very kind to me. So thank you so much.
So I have time for one last question, and then we'll close the interview. And that is, what final recommendation would you like to give to the audience? And by the way, I've been tracking my audience, and there's a lot of CEOs and board members and things like that. And then I get the science engineering ones as well. So it tends to be that, and then some students. But over the years, it tends to skew very senior. So anyways, what advice would you like to give to my audience?
Well, I think I would say 2 things. One is to continuously learn and therefore to stay relevant. And that I think has to happen till the last breath. And therefore, that's one part. But I also would say that, especially for your leadership audience, while everybody needs to focus on the traditional P&L of profit and loss, I think now is the time to look at what Ellen Chetrit of the Knowledge Impact Network said, the other P&L, which is about purpose and legacy. I think to do that, I think we can make the world a better place. So.
Well, those are really great words of advice, and definitely gets into purposeful leadership and purposeful innovation and business and capital, and for the benefit of humanity, all life. So not just humans, now all life, and of course, benefit to Earth ecosystems. Tan, it's been such a pleasure, and we'll continue to work together. You are amazing. You're outstanding. I definitely would recommend anybody to work with you. I treasure the experience I've had with you and will continue to have. as I continue to, work globally. Anyways, thank you for coming in and sharing your experiences with our audience.
Stephen, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your kindness. I look forward to continue to work with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.